What if everything you thought you knew about success was based on a single 3-day interview with the richest man in the world? Hello and welcome back. I am so glad you're here with me today because we are about to embark on a journey that is, quite frankly, going to feel a little bit like archaeology of the human mind. We are digging up the foundations of success itself. You know, we often talk about personal development, productivity, and mindset as if these are modern inventions, things born in the age of the internet or the self-help boom of the 1990s. But today, I want to take you back. Way back. We are looking at the lost writings of the grandfather of personal achievement, Napoleon Hill. Now you know the name. Everyone knows Think and Grow Rich. It is the monolith. It's the book that sold 60 million copies. But have you ever wondered where those ideas actually came from? They didn't just pop into his head in 1937. No, there was a genesis. There was a laboratory phase. And that is what we are exploring today. We are looking at Napoleon Hill's Golden Rules, the lost writings. Specifically, we are going to tear apart the first 40-odd pages of this masterpiece, covering the introduction and the first 2 massive chapters. And let me tell you, if you think you know the law of attraction, or if you think you understand how habits are formed, what we are about to discuss might just flip your perspective entirely. Before we get into the heavy psychological machinery, we have to understand the man. Who was Napoleon Hill? It's easy to picture him as this elderly, wise sage in a suit, but his story starts in the dirt. He was born in 1883 in Wise County, Virginia. And wise is ironic because his early life was anything but. It was poverty. It was struggle. His mother died when he was just 10 years old. Now imagine that. You are 10, you are poor, and the central pillar of your emotional world collapses. In many narratives, that's where the story ends, a life defined by trauma. But then, the variable changes. His father remarries. Enter Martha. This is the stepmother. Now, in fairy tales, the stepmother is the villain. In the story of Napoleon Hill, the stepmother is the savior. The text tells us she was educated, she was supportive, and she saw something in this wild, grieving boy. She didn't just raise him, she directed him. She got him a typewriter. Think about the ripple effect of that one object. A typewriter. She encouraged him to write. By 13, he's a typist. Then a journalist. He goes to business school. He works for Rufus Ayres. He even dabbles in law at Georgetown. He is hungry. But the moment, the singularity that created the Napoleon Hill we know, happened because of a journalism assignment. He was working for Bob Taylor's magazine, and he was sent to interview Andrew Carnegie. Now, for the younger listeners, Andrew Carnegie was the Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk of his day, but probably richer in relative terms. He was the steel titan. The interview was supposed to be a fluff piece. A quick chat. It lasted 3 days. 3 days. Can you imagine? You walk in for a quote, and you end up in a 3-day philosophical lockdown with the richest man on earth. During those 3 days, Carnegie didn't just answer questions, he issued a challenge. He told Hill, "I want you to dedicate the next 20 years of your life to interviewing the most successful people on the planet, Ford, Edison, Rockefeller, and I want you to organize their secrets into a philosophy." Carnegie commissioned him to decode the DNA of success. And Hill said yes. That yes led to 500 interviews. It led to the Law of Success in 1928, and eventually Think and Grow Rich. But the writings we are discussing today? These are the raw notes from the field. These are the articles from 1919 and the early 1920s. This is the fresh clay before it was fired in the kiln of history. So, how do we approach this text? The Napoleon Hill Foundation gives us a very specific instruction right at the start. And I love this because it turns reading into an active sport. They call it the R2A2 method. It sounds like a droid from Star Wars, but it's a formula for learning. First, recognize. You have to spot the principle. Don't just read the words, see the mechanism. Second, relate. This is where most people fail. You have to ask, what does this have to do with my life? Not Hill's life, not Carnegie's life. Your life. Third, assimilate. You have to digest it. Annotate the book. Underline it. Make it part of your mental furniture. And finally, apply. Action. Hill is obsessed with action. He says knowledge is only potential power. It becomes actual power only when you use it. So, as we go through these concepts today, I want you to use the R2A2 method. Don't just listen to my voice. Apply this to your situation. Alright, let's get into Chapter 1. The core argument here is about heredity. Now, usually, when we hear heredity, we think of biology. We think, I have my mother's eyes, or I have my father's height. Hill calls this physical heredity. And he's very blunt about it. You can't change it. If you are short, you are short. If you have blue eyes, you have blue eyes. That is the deck of cards you were dealt by generations of ancestors. It's unchangeable. But then he introduces the second force, and this is where the magic happens. He calls it social heredity. What is social heredity? It is the sum total of every sensory experience you have ever had. It is your environment. It is the software running on the hardware of your brain. And unlike physical heredity, social heredity is plastic. It is changeable. But here is the scary part, and I want you to really lean in for this. Hill argues that the concrete of your character is poured and largely set by the age of 10. Think about that. Who were you at 10? What did your parents tell you about money? What did your teachers tell you about your intelligence? What did your friends tell you about what was cool or possible? Hill identifies 4 sources that shape us: the family, the friends, the school, and the media. These 4 pillars bombard the mind of a child, planting seeds in what he calls a fertile field. He gives us 2 principles regarding this. First, the permanence of early impressions. If a seed is planted deep enough in childhood, it stays there forever. Unless a massive, stronger opposing force comes in to dig it up. That is what we are doing here today. We are creating that opposing force. The second principle he mentions is fascinating for anyone in leadership or sales. He calls it the law of resistance, or the forbidden fruit principle. Humans are wired to want what is difficult to get. If you force an idea on a child, or an employee, or a customer, they will reject it. But if you make them want it, if you make it seem rare or hard to reach, they will fight to adopt it. He says the most skilled persuaders are the ones who plant an idea so subtly that the other person thinks they came up with it themselves. That is social heredity in action. So, if we are programmed by our environment, and if that programming happens before we are 10 years old, are we doomed? Are we just robots acting out a script written by our parents and our first-grade teachers? No. And this brings us to Chapter 2, Autosuggestion. If social heredity is the poison, autosuggestion is the antidote. Hill defines autosuggestion as self-proposal. It is the suggestions you make to yourself. He leans heavily on James Allen here. As a man thinketh. The scientific basis Hill presents is surprisingly modern. He talks about the split between the conscious and the subconscious mind. Here is the mechanic: your conscious mind is the captain. It is the watchman at the gate. It decides what gets in. Your subconscious mind is the crew, or better yet, it's the factory floor. It doesn't ask questions. It doesn't judge. It just builds. It controls your body, your automatic functions, and your deep-seated behaviors. Hill argues that every thought you hold in your conscious mind creates a connecting feeling. That feeling travels down to the subconscious and translates into action. It's a biological process. Thoughts control the brain controls the body. Therefore, thoughts control action. He gives a simple example: courage. If you lack courage, it's because your social heredity programmed you to be fearful. Maybe your mom was a worrier. Maybe you were bullied. To fix it, you don't just try to be brave. You use autosuggestion. You repeat, I believe in myself. I am brave. I can fulfill any task. You say it until the subconscious believes it. But Hill takes it a step further. He introduces what he calls the magnet theory. This is the law of attraction, decades before The Secret. He says the brain acts like a magnet. It attracts people, resources, and circumstances that harmonize with your dominant thoughts. He uses the phrase, birds of a feather flock together, or in the Vietnamese translation, Nga tam nga ma tam ma, buffalo seeks buffalo. Horse seeks horse. If you are miserable, you will attract miserable people. If you are successful, you will attract success. It is physics to him. It is inevitable. So, the application he gives is crisp and clear. 1. Decide on a life's work. A definite chief aim. 2. Write it down. 3. Repeat it. Especially before you go to sleep. Why before sleep? Because that's when the conscious guard goes off duty, and the subconscious factory kicks into high gear. You want to give the factory its orders right before you shut down the front office. Now I can hear some of you. I can hear the skeptics. You're thinking, okay, repeating a mantra before bed? Really? That sounds like magic tricks. That sounds like woo-woo nonsense. And you know what? Napoleon Hill knew you were going to say that. As we move into the second chunk of this text, Hill addresses the skeptics head on. He talks about the concept of the impossible. He reminds us that almost every great leap in human history was mocked by the smart people of the time. He tells the story of George Westinghouse. Now, Westinghouse invented the air brake. Before that, trains were incredibly dangerous because you couldn't stop them quickly. Westinghouse had the idea to use air pressure to stop a locomotive. He took it to the leading railroad experts, the engineers, the Vanderbilts. And they laughed at him. They said, "You're going to stop a massive steel train with wind? With air? You're an idiot." But Westinghouse persisted. And eventually, the laws of physics, and the laws of legislation, proved him right. Now, every train stops with air. Hill brings up Napoleon Bonaparte, the original Napoleon. He talks about how Robert Fulton came to Napoleon with the steamboat, a ship that could sail against the wind. Napoleon looked at him and essentially said, "Ships need sails. You can't sail against the wind. Get out of my office." Hill speculates that if Napoleon had embraced the steamboat, France might have conquered Britain. The British Empire might never have been what it was. A lack of imagination changed the course of history. He mentions Langley and the airplane. Congress mocked Langley. They said, "Men can't fly." They refused to fund him. Why does Hill tell us these stories? To warn us. He is saying, don't be the person who laughs at the air brake. Don't be the person who dismisses the steamboat. And right now, don't be the person who dismisses the power of your own mind. Just because you can't see the mechanism of autosuggestion with a microscope doesn't mean it isn't real. He is asking us to suspend our disbelief and look at the results. And speaking of results, Hill shares perhaps the most bizarre and fascinating personal experiment in the entire book. This is the imaginary council table. This is where the podcast gets a little Twilight Zone. But stay with me, because this is genius. Hill wanted to reconstruct his character. He knew he had flaws. He knew his social heredity had left him with gaps. So, he built a cabinet of advisors. But he couldn't afford to hire them, and most of them were dead. So, he hired them in his imagination. Every night, he would close his eyes and visualize a long conference table. And he would invite specific historical figures to sit with him. And he didn't just look at them, he asked them for their software. He asked to download their traits. He invited Abraham Lincoln. Why? for his sense of justice, for his empathy for the common man. He invited Napoleon Bonaparte, for his relentless persistence, for his ability to turn a disadvantage into an advantage. He invited Ralph Waldo Emerson, for his vision of nature and cause and effect. He invited Elbert Hubbard, for his ability to write with rhythm and persuasion. Hill would sit there in the dark and have imaginary conversations with these men. He would say, "Mr. Lincoln, I desire to build into my own character your keen sense of justice. Now, does this sound crazy? Maybe. But let's look at the data. Let's look at the empirical evidence Hill provides." Before he started this practice, Hill admits he was a terrible public speaker. He was nervous, he was scattered. But after a few weeks of meeting, with Lincoln and Beecher in his mind, he was invited to speak in Pittsburgh. The audience was the Advertising Club of Pittsburgh. But it wasn't just that guys. The room was filled with executives from Carnegie Steel, from H.J. Heinz. These were hard-nosed, wealthy, skeptical business titans. Hill stood up and delivered a lecture on the magic ladder to success. And he crushed it. He mesmerized them. These hardened steel executives voted him the best speaker they had ever heard. Where did that charisma come from? Hill says it came from the council table. He had auto-suggested the confidence of Napoleon and the oratory skills of Beecher into his own subconscious until they became real. He talks about his writing, too. He was trying to emulate Elbert Hubbard, a famous writer of the time. He focused on it so intensely that people started confusing their work. A colleague from Morris & Company actually told him, "You're writing better Hubbard than Hubbard." This is the core argument. You can engineer your own personality. You are not stuck with the personality you developed when you were 7. You can go into the code, rewrite it, and recompile the program. But, and there is always a but, Hill ends this section with a cautionary tale about precision. And this is a financial lesson that is worth the price of admission alone. Hill decided to test this on money. He set a definite chief aim. He wanted to earn $100,000 in a year. Now, in 1919 money, that is millions today. It was a huge, audacious goal. He wrote it down. He visualized it. "I will earn $100,000. And guess what? The universe answered. The magnet worked. Within 6 months, he was offered a position that paid, wait for it, $105,200 a year. The precision is spooky. The $5,200 was for travel expenses. The salary was exactly $100,000. He took the job. He worked like a dog. In 5 months, he generated over $20 million worth of value for this corporation. He was a rainmaker. But he didn't get the money. There was a loophole in the contract. The employer, who turned out to be less than ethical, found a way to avoid paying him the full salary. Hill walked away with a fraction of what he was promised. Now, most people would be furious. They would say, "The law of attraction is a scam." I did the work, I visualized, and I got stiffed. But Hill analyzed it like a scientist. He looked at his written goal. He had written, "I will earn $100,000. And he realized the universe gave him exactly what he asked for. He earned it. He generated the value. He did the work worth $100,000. But he forgot one word. He forgot the word. Receive ***. He realized that his mental magnet was set to earning, not collecting. It's a funny, painful, but profound realization. It teaches us that when we use autosuggestion, when we set these definite chief aims, we must be surgically precise. We must demand not just the opportunity to work, but the fruition of that work. We must align our internal magnet with the entire outcome we desire. So, where does that leave us today, looking at these first 40 pages of lost wisdom? It leaves us with a tremendous sense of agency. Hill is telling us that we are a mix of two things: our biology, which we can't touch, and our environment, which we can. He is telling us that our minds are not fixed concrete, they are wet clay. But the clay hardens quickly, so we have to keep wetting it with new ideas, new autosuggestions, and new influences. He is telling us to build our own imaginary council table. Who do you need in your mental boardroom? Do you need the patience of Gandhi? The innovation of Steve Jobs? The resilience of Oprah? Invite them in. Talk to them. Program their traits into your subconscious. And he is telling us to be specific. Don't just ask to be rich or be happy. Define it. Write it down. Watch your words, because your subconscious is listening, and it takes you very, very literally. Napoleon Hill's golden rules aren't just rules for making money. They are rules for making a self. They are the manual for the human machine. And we are just getting started. This book has so much more to offer. But if you only took these 2 chapters, if you only mastered social heredity and autosuggestion, you would already have the keys to the kingdom. So, here is my challenge to you before the next episode. Do the R2A2. Recognize that you have been programmed by your past. Relate to the fact that you have a goal you've been scared to chase. Assimilate the idea that your mind is a magnet. And apply the method. Tonight, before you sleep, write down your definite chief aim. Be precise. Be bold. And tell yourself, I can. I will. I am. Because as Hill reminds us, the only thing standing between you and the impossible is the belief that it can't be done. Westinghouse stopped the train with air. You can certainly steer your life with thought. Thank you for listening. Keep digging, keep reading, and I'll see you in the next chapter.